I found a lump, age 29. Obviously, we have a family history of breast cancer. My mum's sister, loads of my mum's cousins and other family have had breast cancer. I found a lump, and obviously no one really believed me except my mum. And when we did go to the GP, who was also South Asian, she goes, "No, you're too young. I'm not going to do urgent referral, blah, blah, blah." And so I was very stressed out by that, but my mum really persevered. I basically had a mammogram, had a biopsy, and I knew straight away that they were going to say it was breast cancer. So I had to have a mastectomy. And that, I tell you, is devastating at any age, but particularly when you're a young woman who's really proud of her figure and really healthy. And I was lean, slim, doing triathlons, like super healthy, but there's definitely other aspects of health that maybe I didn't explore in those days. And using both the nutrition and lifestyle, but really looking at that kind of social health, the stress, sleep, all those things that we now know actually make a massive impact to our health. And also kind of some of the psychological, emotional trauma, all of those things, because I know personally that I had a really difficult breakup about 18 months before I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I've just been at a conference which actually for the first time started to look at the link between stress and breast cancer.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune into what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your terms. But before we dive in, I've got a quick favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support that's right for you. Toral, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Could you introduce yourself? I know we're going to be talking about your journey with breast cancer and also lots of other things in between. Can you introduce yourself and talk about your journey from what you were doing to what you're doing now? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with you. And I'm really glad we're getting to have this conversation, especially because we did meet like recently at House of Parliament, talk about all things breast cancer in the South Asian community. So I'm Toral. I'm a nutritional scientist and integrative oncology practitioner. What that means is that I work with patients. I do clinical research, but I also work with patients one-on-one and help them through their cancer journeys, looking at nutrition and lifestyle and all sorts of complementary therapies, all evidence-based. But I personally am really passionate about this because I knew from the age of 11 that I wanted to work in cancer. Being a very precocious child, I read a book and in my head, I was going to cure cancer. Obviously, when you're 11, you have no clue what this is and why. So for me, naturally, the next step was to go to medical school, got to medical school, and which was not quite what I expected. And when I was at university, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. So she went for her first mammogram, age 49, really healthy, and they found 3 small tumors. And for me, that was like devastating, but also just watching her go through the treatment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, hormone treatment. And then they just kind of left you. And I thought, oh, okay, it's very well thinking about cancer in the way that we can cure it. But then what happens afterwards? How do you help people to recover? How do you actually support people to reduce their risk of it coming back? Because in breast cancer, it's actually 30%, which is quite high that breast cancer comes back. And so that became my kind of new passion. I started delving into nutrition and lifestyle. And I kept going to all these appointments with my mum and saying to the oncologist, what about this? And what about this? And what about nutrition? And And they just had they knew nothing. But we already had data and evidence by then. So back in like 1999, the kind of rate of cancer was 1 in 4 in people. Now we're below 1 in 2 people globally, and that's very scary. At those days it was 1 in 8 women had breast cancer. Now it's almost 1 in 5 in the UK. So there's definitely a growing pandemic almost of breast cancer. And so fast forward, and I suddenly realized that I didn't want to be the oncologist. I didn't want to be the one giving the drugs, because yes, you're treating the cancer, but you're not actually helping people to recover. And that's when I decided to leave medicine, which was a really big deal as a brown girl, a South Asian woman. And I spent some time doing a little bit of research, had a complete great break, and then went back and did a master's in nutritional medicine, specializing in cancer back in God, it was over 21 years ago, so quite a long time ago. So I guess I was a very early convert to nutrition and lifestyle, and looking at what we now call lifestyle medicine or integrative, medicine. And at that time, no one really got it. They're like, why have you left? Blah, 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 blah. And so I used to use food and cooking to kind of reel people into the nutrition and try to teach them about it, because it wasn't mainstream then. Back in 2004, 6, 5, 7, no one really understood it, and they didn't know why they needed to eat better. It was all very much about, physical activity and things like that. So fast forward to the end of the taught part of that master's program, and I found a lump, age 29. Obviously, we have a family history of breast cancer. My mum's sister, loads of my mum's cousins and other family have had breast cancer.
That's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. And I found a lump, and obviously no one really believed me except my mum. And when we did go to the GP, who was also South Asian, she goes, no, you're too young. I'm not going to do urgent referral, blah, blah, blah. And so I was very stressed out by that. But my mum really persevered, and she worked at the hospital in radiology. So she kind of helped me get an appointment. And I basically had a mammogram, had a biopsy, and I knew straight away that they were going to say it was breast cancer. So age 29, was diagnosed with very early stage, admittedly, what we now call ductal carcinoma in situ, with a little bit of stage 1 microinvasion breast cancer, and had to have a mastectomy. And that, I tell you, is devastating at any age, but particularly when you're a young woman who's really proud of her figure and really healthy. And I was lean, slim, doing triathlons, like super healthy, but there's definitely other aspects of health that maybe I didn't explore in those days, and I'm sure we'll talk about those later. So fast forward now, and I'm really working the way I wanted to work all those years ago, but I work with patients using both their nutrition and lifestyle, but really looking at their kind of social health, stress, sleep, all those things that we now know actually make a massive impact to our health, and also kind of some of the psychological, emotional trauma, all of those things. Because I know personally that I had a really difficult breakup about 18 months before I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And when I talk to younger women anecdotally, there's definitely a link between younger women going through some sort of trauma and then breast cancer. So definitely. And I've just been at a conference which actually for the first time started to look at the link between stress and breast cancer. So lots to talk about there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that is a lot to unpack. And going from, like just cancer generally, from 1 in 8 to 1 in 10 to now 1 in 2, that actually worries me. And I feel like, why are we going backwards when there's so much research going in to cancer? And I don't know, I feel like we haven't progressed. Can you talk a bit about that? Because a lot of people might think, well, yeah, I know, people say, okay, we're living longer, but that doesn't add up to me either, to be honest.
No, that's a really good question. So I think first we've got to remember that diagnosis has improved. So obviously when you diagnose more people, then obviously the numbers are going to go up. So we have a really successful screening program in the UK. We actually have one of the best screening programs in the UK for breast cancer anyway, not necessarily all of the others, but we actually have a good process for bowel cancer too. And so we do need to remember that. The other thing is people are living longer. The longer you live, the more there is chance for your DNA to damage. If you think about your cells and the DNA kind of being the recipe, it's like photocopying a recipe multiple times. And then sometimes you're going to lose what the recipe is because obviously it's been over photocopied so many times. So there is that too. But we also have a lot of environmental concerns that we didn't know about maybe 50 years ago. So we come into contact with far more environmental pollution, chemicals, microplastics, something we call xenoestrogens, which are chemicals that can act very mildly like estrogenic. So like plastics like BPA, phthalates, phenols, all of those things. And we don't necessarily have those in our environment. Our foods change, the amount of pesticides we're using. So there is that too. And the rates of, treating cancer are also improving.
Yeah.
So people are more likely to survive and more likely to live longer. And if you think about something like breast cancer, actually survival rates when caught early are very, very good. Like they're over like 85%. So, but then there is also a subset of women who are having reoccurrence, and we're still trying to understand why it comes back. And I will say, and to be really open, I've had 2 local reoccurrences. So that means it's come back in the same area, in the breast area. Whereas when I'm talking about reoccurrences, I'm talking about metastatic, where it spreads around the body, and that's when obviously it becomes incurable. So that's different. And so our lifestyles have also changed. We're now not eating in the same way as before. We're certainly in the UK, we're catching up with the United States, and we're the leading country when it comes to eating ultra processed foods in Europe. We have the most obese population in Europe. In Europe, we probably drink a lot of alcohol. So last week was Cancer Prevention Week with the World Cancer Research Fund, which undertakes a lot of research into nutrition and lifestyle and cancer. And most people, when were polled, had no idea. I think a quarter of people had no idea that cancer and alcohol were even related. They didn't know that it increased the risk of 7 different cancers, including breast cancer. They didn't know that even just a little bit of alcohol could do the same, not just drinking loads. So there's so many different aspects to our health and well-being. And, many of us as women have been on the pill for a long time, or HRT, and there's definitely links between those things. And little other things like detoxification, we're just in contact with so many more chemicals than ever before. So it takes a toll on our body. And then we're not feeding it and nourishing it in the way we may have done in the past. We haven't got the same access to nature. And then smartphones in the last 12 years, we are all exposed to so much more blue light. We're all probably way more stressed because we're being bombarded with information 24/7. And I'm going to be honest, I am just as susceptible to the next person for scrolling. Last night I ended up watching loads of videos on Gaza and educating myself, because obviously with some of the Glastonbury conversations and things, and I knew a lot of what was going on, but some of the reality and really understanding how much IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are actually contravening international law and really doing things which really makes absolutely no sense other than it being a genocide. It upset me and I cried for half an hour, and then obviously it was really hot, so by the time I got to sleep it was probably about 2 a.m. and I'm just as susceptible. So we are being bombarded with more information than ever, and there's so many aspects to this and we don't understand it quite fully.
That is a lot. And do you think all of those things can add up to, correct me if I'm wrong, everyone has cancer cells in their body, but they're just lay dormant until they're kind of activated?
Yeah, so basically our human body is amazing and our immune system is fantastic. And if you think about the immune system as being a CCTV camera system, it's going around your body all the time, catching any cells which are growing out of control. Cancer cells are your own cells. They're not other people's cells. They just happen to be growing out of control and not listening to any of the control checkpoints or processes that we have in our body for lots of reasons, and they're evading our immune system. So everybody has them at any time, and hopefully our body's very good at picking them up. But if we're having an ultra processed diet, we're drinking more alcohol, we're not doing physical activity, we are stressed, we're contact to lots of chemicals, certain types of chemicals, then of course it's a much more of a burden on our system, and our immune system isn't able to catch them all.
Where do we go for the right information? Because, you talk about social media and even just the media in general, wherever you get your information from, there is so much misinformation out there, people talking about all sorts of things. I mean, there was something recently in the news about a girl that died from cancer because her mother told her not to have chemotherapy and go down some kind of juicing route or something.
Yeah, she did Gerson therapy and it was an alternative. So I think it's very difficult because our NHS, and we had an amazing discussion on this. I was with the World Cancer Research Fund last week, and it was really about bringing nutrition and lifestyle, really particularly nutrition, physical activity we have the research, but into the NHS and into clinical practice, and how do we advise? The part of the problem is that most doctors, oncologists, surgeons haven't been trained in nutrition and lifestyle. And the ones who are consultants who are kind of our age, and that's a problem. So unless they've gone away and done something extra, they won't know themselves. So they're not confident about giving the right advice. So people are going to social media, and there are some very reputable people. Hopefully I'm one of those reputable people. But there are also a lot of people who are doctors who are not who are not trained in it. So they poo-poo a lot of ideas. So it becomes very complex and nuanced. I know a big cancer doctor influencer who's constantly quite rude about, she calls it all integrative healthcare alternative, and that's not the case. She just doesn't understand enough about nutrition and lifestyle. And so I think it becomes very tricky for people. But I think you need to look for people really with those nutrition and lifestyle qualifications. You need to look for people who are quoting research articles. You need to go to pieces like the World Cancer Research Fund. Sadly, Cancer Research UK, Breast Cancer Now, Macmillan, some of them are really great. They've got so much information, but some of them on the nutrition and lifestyle, it's actually quite basic.
Yeah.
So this is it becomes really difficult. And what's happened is that because the advice they're giving and the NHS is so conservative, even though we've got loads of research data to support some of these things, they're not actually giving that advice. So for example, at the beginning of June, an amazing trial came out called the Challenge trial, which basically was what we call a phase 3 clinical trial, which is like a gold standard trial, which showed that exercise was more effective than many drugs, which were, approved by FDA, which is, the Food and Drugs Association. So, yeah, that's what it is. And more effective. And what we know is that not just from that trial, but lots of other ones, that exercise can reduce the risk of reoccurrence in some cases by up to 50 or 60%. No drugs really work more than 10%. It's incredible. So we need to really get that into our medical system and make it as part of the treatment plan.
Yeah.
And so it is very tricky. It is very difficult. And I think that it's hard for people who are diagnosed because some of the loudest voices are those who know the least. Empty ships make most noise.
Yeah.
And really look for qualifications.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You should always kind of verify the information. Now, you talk about obviously the NHS when you are diagnosed and you go through the process and then you kind of left to kind of move on with your life and carry on with your life. There's no information about nutritional support. But yes, and I totally understand, the NHS is kind of, maxed out, and perhaps surgeons and oncologists, they can't really kind of have the time to go through your whole, nutrition. But there are other people that could do that. Like yourself, obviously. But is there no way to kind of integrate this into the NHS using like nutritionists like yourself to work alongside the surgeons and the oncologists and all the, medical professionals?
Honestly, that's the dream that, in NHS, we wouldn't have just dietitians, we'd have nutritionists and, trained to work with patients. Obviously, funding's a big deal. If you go to a more private or more integrated system, then that is available to you, that kind of system where, you're giving exercise and nutrition advice. So the London Homeopathic Hospital has now become the Royal London, was it a Royal London Hospital of Integrative Medicine? So obviously there is a bit more support. There are charities like Yes to Life that give a bit more support. There are other charities that have written resource. I've written something with Trek Stop, which is a charity for younger people, to give a bit more support. So it's about really trying to work out what we can do, because funding is an issue. We're not in a preventative model now. Because in the UK and Europe we have free healthcare, people have kind of taken that for granted and think if there's something wrong, we'll get help.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic because we do get help. And we know if you're diagnosed cancer, you get good treatment generally here. However, we need a more preventative healthcare system, but also not just healthcare, but a food system and a society system, because we have become so individualized and the blame is put on the individual rather than collective care. And that's what needs to change. So I don't know how that's going to change. I don't know how it's going to change with the current government. I'm very disgusted that, and I will use that word, that we've just increased our defense spending up to 5 billion in the UK, and yet people aren't getting treatment. There are lots of drugs which are being refused for cancer patients who are terminal metastatic. And for me, that's not how you change it. And the lobbying around the food industry, we were supposed to ban all these adverts for children and stuff. So some of that happened. Then some of it, some of the things they promised that would happen haven't happened. The food, school dinners, hospital food, it's very poor quality in some places. So that's all the kind of things. And then we need to educate people. We need to make it easier to make healthy food and eat it. And we are so time pressured now. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Particularly when you think about the cost of living now, eggs have gone up from like, £1.50 to like at least £2.60. It's really expensive for people. And whilst seasonal fruit and vegetables are cheaper and you can go to your local market and things like that, you have to know how to cook them. You have to have somewhere to store them. And some of the people who are most, when you think about the social determinants of health, so who are the most economically challenged, they don't always have the ability to buy bulk, which is cheaper. They don't always have enough storage. They don't have time because they're working 2 or 3 jobs to manage their families. So we kind of need a massive social structure. I mean, I think capitalism's to blame, but that's a whole other conversation. But, really, I think if we look at the world right now, and if you look at the environment and climate change, all those things, we are very much, all of this is linked, and we are due a huge shift. I'm curious to see what's going to happen over the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite normally optimistic, but when it comes to this, I just feel like we're going in the completely opposite direction. I have hope that things will change, but I don't know. I don't know if things are changing, because nothing feels like it's progressed. Yes, okay, you talk about people getting diagnosed a lot quicker and things like that, but the whole kind of food, there's a lot involved. It's not just getting diagnosed. There's a whole lot of things to unpack. And if food is so expensive, like good quality, nutritious food is so expensive, how are the majority of people who can't afford that going to improve their lifestyle?
Exactly. And it's a conversation, I've had with a few people recently who are middle class, educated people, and even they're struggling. So I don't know is the answer. I think we almost need to burn the system down and start from scratch. And of course we can do that. But I think we need to change how we grow our food. We need a more regenerative system. I think we need to focus on the quality. I think we have to think about our kind of the environmental policies and how we, stop using things like fossil fuels, because we can use wind power and all of those things. They're all invented, so hydropower, I think, like Scotland makes a lot of hydropower. We have a lot of wind farms in the UK. We need to get back to, and all of that's going to impact how we grow our food and what we do to our soil. Our water in the UK and our rivers are filthy. And, all the water companies are not doing anything about it. So a lot of it then becomes political. And if you say you're apolitical, it means that you've got so much privilege that you don't need to care. And I know I'm making this very political today, but that's how I'm feeling right now. But we have to think about collective care.
Yeah.
And if we don't, there's a lot of basically old white men in charge who are really thinking about themselves. And we have to change. That has to change. So one of the things that happened in the 1970s in Iceland was that all the women were on strike. And that changed things. And they have a very strong female leadership now. And I feel like maybe, particularly given that the people are protesting every Saturday for the war in Gaza to stop. They're protesting about the cost of living, lots of things. We need to get maybe more political as a country, as people, and put more pressure, boycotting, striking, writing, because realistically, we're the ones being let down.
Yeah. I had this conversation with my friend last week, actually. Funny you talk about that. I said to her, there are so many people protesting about all sorts of things. And I think maybe many, many, many years ago that potentially would have worked. But I think now, I don't think that's even going to touch the sides. You need to, as a collective, if you don't like something, you need to, as an example, if you know McDonald's is doing bad, a whole load of people need to stop buying McDonald's for McDonald's to take action. And they will only take action, personally, I think they'll only take action because obviously it impacts their pockets, the profit, but at least they'll take action.
100%. We have to affect people's profit. So if you think about Jeff Bezos and how he's just spent 50 million on his wedding, that's the equivalent of a normal middle class household spending £32, which shows it's a drop in his wealth, right? He needs to pay tax. So the only way we can affect that is because he's basically exploiting people. It's like slavery, but and capitalism. And so what we need to do is all stop buying stuff from Amazon. I'm just as guilty, but if everyone even reduced it by 50%, that would be a massive difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, again, like you're saying about McDonald's or whatever it might be.
Yeah, whatever. I'll just use that as an example.
This is an example, you see.
Yeah.
And if then we could protest and say, like, you've got to pay tax. Because if these top 10 richest men in the world paid even 1% tax, we could affect climate change. We could affect regenerative farming. We could change like how we use fuel. Them zipping around in their private jets is not helping the situation.
Yeah. And then, yeah, absolutely. I want to rewind because we've gone into like this whole thing, which is great. But when you were diagnosed, and I know your mum was obviously diagnosed as well, I want to do like a bit of a generational comparison. What was the difference in terms of when you both went in to kind of let the GP, I'm assuming GP was the first port of call, to say, I think I have a lump or I have a lump. I know you were dismissed very quickly because of your age, but then you had a huge history. How was that for your mum? And then how long did it take for the diagnosis? And then I'm like, coming out with 5 million questions at once. But how did that go on from there for you, in terms of the journey with that?
So my mum was diagnosed when she had her first routine mammogram. She had no idea what it was. She just went for the routine mammogram.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. And she was 49 because they call you in kind of 3 yearly groups in your GP surgery. It goes round.
Yeah. So it could have been later though.
Part of it was luck.
That was luck because it could have been in
it could be
3 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was luck. And also by then we didn't have as many people in our family who'd been diagnosed. And if there had been, they hadn't quite told us.
Yeah.
So we found out a lot more after my mum was diagnosed, and so mum's cousins and like other people. And then more, my mum's own sister was diagnosed after my mum. So my mum was definitely at the younger age group. So that was different. But once mum was diagnosed, again, we were both treated at the Royal Marsden, which is a very, very good hospital, even though at slightly different locations. And so things moved quickly. And I think from her perspective, they threw everything at it. I wonder if we would have gone with a more conservative approach if she had been diagnosed now. She probably would have still had a mastectomy, but would she have had chemotherapy? I don't know. Radiotherapy? I don't know. They definitely have radiotherapy, and hormone treatment, bearing in mind the side effects. So whereas with me, it took a bit longer for me to be diagnosed because I had this lump. I had to watch it for myself a bit. Then I showed my mum. She said, "Why don't we wait for one cycle of your period to and then we went to our family GP, who was wonderful, but he is a man who knew us socially. So he said, "Can you wait till next week when the new female GP starts?" So of course that made sense. He didn't want to examine me, and I feel like that's absolutely fair. So we did, and then she didn't really listen to the thing, and that's when there was a delay of 6 to 8 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
And then the appointment I got was mainly because my mum worked in the radiology department, and of course you can't do that now, but and so again, that's also luck, and it's not just luck, it's the privilege we had, right, with having connections and being educated.
Oh yeah.
And so then I was diagnosed and things happened a bit more quickly, but then I actually paused once I realized kind of the extent of the cancer, because I had some surgery at the local hospital, and then went and found some specialists who specialize in younger women, because I was at a totally different life stage as my mum. So I think that's really the point. My mum was married. Me and my brother both in our 20s. She'd been my dad forever, all of those, or 25 years or whatever it was. And so it's very different to losing your breast. I'm not saying it wasn't equally hard for her, but my mum's also one of those people that's actually not particularly vain. She's quite chill with it and super active. As long as she's active, she's not that bothered about how she kind of looks, although she looks great. Whereas for me, I just felt like my womanhood and my sexuality and all of those things are really impacted, and I didn't know how it would be. And then I remember, which I found absolutely fascinating and so bizarre, when I was having my first surgery, it was a South Asian anaesthetist who actually knew my mum, wheeling me down, as my anaesthetist at theatre. She goes, "Oh, I know you'll need to get married, so don't worry, I won't tell anyone." I was like, A, Hippocratic oath, you can't. And B, I'm telling people I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
If people are not going to want to marry me because I've had breast cancer, they can just bleep, 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 because they're not the kind of person they want to be with.
And they're not going to find out? I mean,
it's kind of obvious, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, even though I've got reconstruction. To be fair, I have had reconstruction. Most people can't really tell.
Yeah.
And generally men don't really notice that much.
Yeah.
But it is, I found that an educated South Asian woman was saying that, and I just thought, and this is where our community needs to change. And a lot of the work that my mom and I do is really education with the South Asian community, and bringing awareness, because we have poor awareness. We have a poor awareness of the risk factors of breast cancer. People don't know that breastfeeding reduces the risk of breast cancer. They don't know about physical activity. They don't know, and they just don't do this. Our lifestyle's not, great. And so, and we don't have self-care as women. We're taught to put ourselves last. So that was also very different, right, from my mum. And my mum also had probably more support in some ways, because my mum is one of 5 sisters. Every single one of them took turns to come over and look after my mum and be with her, plus my dad's sister, while she was going through treatment. Whereas it was kind of me. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, my friends were great. My family was great the first time. When I had local recurrences, people were not there as much for me. And this last time, it was in the pandemic. I live alone. It was really, really hard. Everyone was also at capacity at the pandemic. It was like, it was early 2021.
Yeah.
They just couldn't, they didn't have their space to give. And when I kind of asked for what I needed, people couldn't do it. And it was really difficult.
What were you asking for? What did you
need? Really, really straightforward, basic things, like, because we could only just meet people by going for walks. And things, like, can you drop food around to my house? Stuff like that. And particularly the men in my family, even though they're all super educated, theoretically liberal, I really did not like it when I asked for my needs to be met. As far as I'm concerned, I had to be happy with what I was given, not what my needs were. None of them had breast cancer. None of them had surgery. How do they know? How do they have a clue of what I needed? I'm giving them what I exactly need. I need these 3 things. And the reason I know this was my 2 closest friends at the time spent quite a lot of time talking to me about it. And what is it you need? So then we can help you, or we can help you word it so your family understand and your friends understand, people understand. And it was an exercise, and they just couldn't. They couldn't be with it, because I was supposed to be grateful for whatever they could give me, not ask for my needs to be met. And I just found the patriarchy in our community just like, wow, okay, the internalized patriarchy. And it came from some of the women too. And it caused quite a split in my family with me and a lot of my brother, my cousins, a lot of the male members of my family. But it's also been a source of healing. It's something I'm working on all the time. I spend quite a lot of time with the mothers, my mom and my aunts, showing them their internalized patriarchy and their own internalized bias so they can work on it.
There's a book you mentioned.
Yeah, it's a really, really good book. It's written by a South Asian psychologist called Sahaj, who it's called What Will People Say? And, in Hindi is look. I'm not very good at Hindi, but it's a fantastic book. It actually goes through loads of exercises you can do, like therapy type exercise, and it's really fantastic. I definitely recommend it with anyone. It's really for anyone who's South Asian, lives in the Western world.
Yeah.
Who's maybe a 2nd generation immigrant, a 2nd or 3rd generation.
I know you donated some books to some family members.
Oh, yes, that's what they got for their Mother's Day gift.
So
with love, though, with so much love, because I love them and I want them to do better. And my reason for them to do better is you've all got grandchildren, you've got granddaughters. Is this what you want for them? And they're constantly afraid that the boys will withhold their grandchildren from them. And I'm like, no, you've got to do better, because remember, you are part of why your children are the way they are and why the boys are centered, why they're centered and why they're almost on a pedestal over the girls. I'll tell you about Chickenpox gate. So when I had breast cancer in 2018, in early 2019, so literally it was end of 2018, and literally 2 months later, I was at my cousin's house with his son. It was his son's birthday, and he's lovely, and I was giving him a cuddle, and it was a bit sort of sweaty and hot. I was like, oh, that's fine. And then when we went out for a drink afterwards with his dad and me and my brother and family, the school obviously called in the meantime and said, oh, there's a chickenpox outbreak. So eventually I found out I've never had chickenpox, despite all the chickenpox parties we were So I was really worried, because my immune system was down. I had just had the surgery. I was going to have treatment, all these things. And fast forward 2 weeks, I had very, very bad chickenpox. It was excruciating. But my mum didn't want to come. She's like, oh, I don't want to come because, then I'm supposed to be going to Hong Kong this year, and I don't want to take the chickenpox to your brother's children. I was like, my brother was like, the children are vaccinated. And also, you've had chickenpox, Mum, so that's not going to happen. And it was a real source of upset. She just didn't want to help me. I'm like, okay. Eventually, I got better. So I went to them, and they said, oh, they'll cook food. And they didn't cook food. They just organized takeaway, and then spent a lot of time talking about what they're going to cook for their sons and their grandchildren. So I went home and I was like stewing the whole way home. And then I called them. I was like, I've just had breast cancer. I have found it really difficult. I've just had chickenpox. And all I wanted to was some sort of mother type of cooked food, home cooked food.
Home cooked food.
And you didn't do it. And they're like, oh, but you're such a good cook. I said, no, this is where, but yet you've talked about your son. Do you understand this is, and this is where it started. Yeah. They started to understand their own inbuilt systems. And this is what our South Asian culture's like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if our families are super liberal and modern.
And I have like massive experience with that as well. It's almost like, the sons need to kind of, they're tired and they need rest. And then the daughters are kind of like, you can do more, you can carry on. You're this, and you that kind of narrative, really.
Oh no, the boys are centered, and I am basically against centering men in my life.
Yeah,
but also getting my children, getting my family. Yeah, to decenter them. So I had a trip recently with my uncle, and he has mental health issues, but it was so interesting to understand, because he was one of the only boys growing up in a family of girls, how centered he is and how he expects that. And he's actually quite self-absorbed and selfish with it. I'm gonna have to be careful if anyone listens to this podcast. But like, I've said this openly, but like, this is, and it's not his fault. I'm going to be honest. And I have great compassion for him, but this is the society that we grew up in. Yeah. And this has to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we need a more matriarchal society rather than patriarchal.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you think things have changed since your diagnosis then, in terms of the taboos? Have things kind of eased off a bit, or you think it's still the same?
I think there are definitely some changes, but I think there's lots of issues too. And that's, we started a charity called South Asian Supernovas. And our first big campaign was really to try and tackle awareness and taboos. Yeah. Because in our community, we're still not really talking about cancer. It's still such a taboo word. And there are definitely more people talking about it and more open people. And I would say there are more people probably of our generation or younger. But I will still say it's quite taboo in some of the older generations. And even some of the people who are our age and younger. Like, I know someone, sadly, who probably even slightly younger than us. And unfortunately, she was actually a nurse, so a healthcare professional, became metastatic, didn't tell her family. South Asian.
Why?
And because of all the taboos and the worries and all those things, and actually passed away. And it's devastating. And you think about, all the people, like, if they were educated, if we all talked about it more, then more people would be aware. And we have some amazing South Asian doctors and healthcare professionals talking about it. We have people, patients talking about it, who are really open. And we got to hear some of them, didn't we? Yeah. Their stories. But a lot of people are not talking about it, and that's what we need. And we have to get rid of this, like the fact that it's some sort of fate or bad evil eye or whatever it is. And also, like, what is it? Why do we feel that people with cancer are damaged goods? So one thing I will say is I have never been introduced to any guys ever since then. Yeah. And I was so young. And, I was out with some friends at the weekend who live in the States and similar age, when we were talking about the dating scene there and dating scene. And I kind of said, like, and they were both, one of them was a doctor. And because we were just saying that it's still the most successful is when you meet people at work or you meet people through friends and family. And they were just shocked when I said, look, no one's ever introduced me since then. And as men, as South Asian men, they were really surprised. I mean, they were the nicest people ever, but like, these are the kind of things that we need to stop happening. And what is that? So I think there's definitely something about education. There's definitely something about breaking down the patriarchy and women's role in the home, and and allowing women time to self-care and to exercise. When it comes to physical activity, South Asian women in the UK are the most sedentary group. Why is that? If you look at the barriers, it's to do with clothing, it's to do with clothing's the last one, by the way, but it's to do with like family time and the expectations. Like, there's still the thing where as a teenage girl, if you have free time, you're expected to learn how to cook the Indian food, whereas the boys can just go and play football, which is also active and social, know. So there's all these elements to it. We're taught to educate, really focus on education and jobs. And then suddenly we're like, we don't know. We have not role models to look after ourselves. I just feel so grateful that my parents are both really into exercise and physical activity and role modeled that constantly and did things with us. Yeah. And that was quite unusual, I will say.
Yeah, your mum, like, she was a huge role model for that time.
She was open about her breast cancer diagnosis. She started a South Asian cancer group. She runs a breast cancer group still now, 26 years on. She's amazing. But I don't know if, I'm sure it would be totally different if my family weren't like that, if my mum wasn't like that. And also she came from this family where boys were centered and all these things, but she's learned to break free. Part of it's coming to the UK and not being with her family.
Yeah. Oh, are they?
They're all
they
in Kenya and wherever else.
Okay.
So yeah, it's being in a, you know, being able to learn to live in a different way. And you know, my dad's family, a lot of them are here, but they live in North London. So we grew up in South London, and so my parents had a bit more autonomy on how we were brought up and how they wanted to do things.
What advice would you give to women that, you know, I'm just going to use the cancer as a general now, okay, not focusing just on breast cancer, who want to kind of prevent cancer from happening? And I know it, you know, that's a big thing to say, but there are things you can, you know, we talked about alcohol. That's one thing. That's you know, there's a huge culture of drinking. And now I'm paranoid because as soon as, you know, obviously through university, I was probably I was getting drunk on some days, you know, going out clubbing and God knows what. And then when I started work, you know, every Thursday night, drink night. And then next day, everyone's got a hangover in the office, you know, and now I'm thinking, oh shit.
Well, look, that's done. That's past.
That's done now.
I think, you know,
I know.
So first of all, I'm going to not just even focus on cancer. I'm going to focus on our health. You know, if we think about the South Asian community, and I'm talking about South Asia in particular, but we have really poor metabolic health. We have increased risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, plus this cancer risk is increasing.
Yeah.
So when we think about all of those things, there are some really key bits of information that I would want to share. First of all is you've got to know your normal. Know your own body and what's normal for you. We're all so different and we're different shapes and sizes, and you know what's normal for one person isn't going to be the same. Like know your cycle. Like I track it. I think it's really important to know these things, you know, so then you know if something's off. Know your body, like, you know what your toilet habits are when you're going for a poo, you know what's normal for you with your breast and your body and what it looks like and what it feels like. So that's my kind of thing. Make sure you go for any kind of testing that you're offered, like cervical, you know, pap smears and things like that. Second thing is that there's lots of dietary and kind of lifestyle things, and I'll kind of just list them out. From a nutritionist perspective, we want to all be eating a lot more colourful fruits and vegetables, legumes, beans, nuts and seeds, and have a lot of fibre. It's one of the things that we don't focus on, but in the UK, the recommended amount is 30 grams. Most women are having 19 grams of protein. Men are having even less. And we need to have more fiber. So it's little things like adding a spoon of sunflower seeds to things, or chia seeds, or milled flaxseed, or making sure you have a portion of like beans, or, you know, a few nuts and lots of vegetables.
Yeah.
So that's it. Have a very colourful diet. Having in your cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables are the broccolis, the cauliflowers, all of those sorts of things. Actually, even things like rocket. And they're really important for our body to detoxify. So our body helps to break down any used estrogen or any of those hormones and other things, and it binds to them. It helps us to poo it out. So that's really important. Then the next thing is like, again, we have very poor metabolic health in the South Asian community. So having enough protein, we start off with less muscle mass than other ethnicities. Then bear in mind that a lot of us are vegetarian, don't eat enough protein. And then when it comes to age 30 plus, we're losing up to 8% of muscle mass every year. So by the time you get to 50, you've lost so much muscle mass. If you're not weight training and you're not eating sufficient protein, that's going to impact your metabolism. It's going to impact your risk of disease and diabetes. My mum is super, super active and she has been eating less protein. And she suddenly went into diabetic and she didn't tell me. And I was absolutely furious. I'm like, you literally have access to me. I'm one of the top nutritionists in the UK. But why would you not tell me? She's like, I was scared. She's like, I know what you'll say. I was like, well, hang on a second. You've got to understand that you're now 75 plus. You have to eat more protein, not less protein.
What would you like? What if you're vegetarian?
Even if you're vegetarian, there's lots you can do.
Like what? What would you eat if you're a vegetarian?
If you're vegetarian, so tofu and tempeh are really high in protein. So lentils are less than you think.
So that's the question I wanted to ask, because I'm not vegetarian, but my family are. So my husband is, and the kids are, or some of the kids are. And I was under the assumption, I've always been told this thing that, eat lots of lentils, it's full of lots of protein. And now I've discovered actually that's not really true.
It's full of lots of fiber, which is good for your health. It's only 6 to 8% protein.
Yeah.
So if you think from a calorie perspective, to get your 25 grams of protein, you need to eat 400 grams of chickpeas. Whereas chicken, you only need to eat like 110.
Yeah.
Greek yogurt, such a great thing. If you eat egg whites, you know, sometimes a low-fat cheese, cottage cheese, all of those things are superb. But tempeh is my favorite vegan. Edamame beans.
Yeah.
So many things. Nuts, again, like people say, oh, I eat lots of nuts. I'm like, that's mostly fat. So a little bit of protein, but it's not your protein source. So kind of adding everything and then mixing and matching things.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with having a bit of protein powder. At the moment, I'm just conscious of my protein intake for lots because I'm, you know, transitioning into the next chapter of life.
Yeah.
So I'm having a protein shake most days because it's really quick and easy. It means I can get the fiber in too because I use berries and I put in some milled flaxseed or linseed or chia seeds or whatever. So that fiber content is, you know, a good 10 grams. And then I'm trying to, you know, have the protein. So that's really important. And you have to do physical activity. It doesn't mean in a set context like the gym, but you do need to be doing strength and resistance training. The government guidelines in the UK and the US are you need to do at least 150 minutes of exercise a day. That's for white people. Brown people, South Asians, you need, unfortunately, between 230 and 250 minutes of physical activity a week.
Why is it
because
different?
to counteract our metabolic health, because we have such poor metabolic health. And that actually comes from British colonization. In the when the British colonized what is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they had 24 famines in a 50-year period. That changes epigenetically. So we're all very good at putting on fat. That's why we have less muscle mass, because it was easier for us to survive.
Yeah.
And our bodies change. So to counteract that, we need more physical activity, yet we're sedentary. Plus, we need the resistance training. It could be, you know, if you're sitting up and down from the chair, that's like a chair squat. Hold some beans, have a backpack full of books. Doesn't need to be, but you have to keep moving. Walking is not enough. If I could have two things tattooed on my head, be like, walking is not enough. You need to be out of breath. And secondly, eat more protein.
Yeah.
Really important. And then it becomes sleep. Like, I know I'm the world's most poor sleeper. I'm awful. And so I really focus on trying to get my sleep, like, you know, the right temperature of the room, which is very difficult when it's hot, like making sure it's dark, making sure I have a bedtime routine, you know, having some supplements if need be, like enough magnesium, and whether it's cream or spray or whatever it might be. And then stress management. Stress is such a big thing. And we haven't got that much data or research in, but we do know that chronic stress causes all sorts of cancer type reactions in our body that can increase our inflammation, but also increase the risk of DNA damage. So when I think about chronic stress, I mean the stress that you have that lasts over a long period of weeks or months, that goes away. Not acute stress where you're like, oh my God, am I going to miss the train? I need to run for the train.
Yeah.
Not that. But this is something, you know, when you have stressful work or whatever it might be. Yeah, COVID was a real sense of stress for us, you know, in multiple ways. And then your environment and toxins, like trying to really think about cleaner products, you know, cleaning products. Do we need all these chemicals? Like, you know, I've transitioned to completely as non-toxic products as I can. In fact, even using vinegar and bicarbonate of soda are really useful too. But, you know, there are lots of clean brands these days. But your personal body, you know, products. Women, we come into contact with about 360 chemicals before we've even left the house, with a body wash and this and that and makeup. So really look for, again, clean versions, because the more we can help our body, it's being bombarded with stuff, it needs to detoxify, and it's amazing, it's very good at detoxifying, but not when there's so much stuff being thrown at it. And then, you know, social health, we are lonelier than ever before. We know there's a global loneliness pandemic for men, for women, for everyone. So what can we do to create society and community? And for me, that's something I find challenging as a single woman living alone who does not have children, but I have to keep working on it. And I choose to do that through, actually around the corner from here, a great new place is opening, which is a social sauna with breath work and meditation. And I'm so excited because I feel like that's going to be my next kind of little spiritual home. And there's a new yoga studio, which is very community-led around the corner. And like playing tennis. I play tennis once or twice a week with local people. And it's a really important thing, because where you meet real people in real life.
Yeah, community. That's something that I've understood recently, actually, like socializing, like in a positive way, so that, you know, you got to make sure the people around you make you feel good, not make you feel like crap, obviously, is so important. And you know, just making sure you're around good people, going out and exploring different things, it makes such a big difference. And I'm wondering if that even helps with your kind of sleep and stuff as well.
Absolutely.
You know?
I know when I track my sleep, I'm wearing an Oura ring, that when I'm with my loved ones, so the last week, I have been with a lot of people that I've don't get to see very often, whether they're work colleagues and friends or other people. And even though it's been very hot and all the other things, I can see my heart rate recovery is so much better, my heart rate variability, because I'm with these people. I know that when I'm going to be with my nephews next week, my heart rate variability increases massively. Plus, I'm normally out in nature with them.
Yeah.
And it's that all of that impacts your sleep and your recovery and your heart rate. So there's something to be said that we have to look for people who are radiators, not drains. Energetically. And there is that whole thing, adage, isn't there? You're the sum of the 5 people you spend most time with.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you necessarily are, but what we know from the research and data is that if your friend is obese, you're more likely to be obese. If your friend's friends are obese, you're more likely to be obese or overweight. So these are all things. And I think when we look at Blue Zones data where social health is so important, that's where we grew up. Community was so important. We lived as communities, and we've become quite individual as an impact of capitalism. And actually, we need to get back to that community. And that's how we can actually live healthier lives.
And the phones don't help.
The phones do not help. And I'm just as guilty of that. So.
Oh, yeah, we're all guilty of it. You know, I'm not going to start preaching and saying, you know, I'm so innocent with all of that. And I go on and on at my kids about it like a crazy woman. And I am also guilty about it, but it is what it is. But it's about acknowledging that and really trying to make sure that you don't go on the screens at night and, you know, a few hours before you sleep and these kinds of things. It's hard, but
it is hard. And things like even just I plug my phone. I mean, it is in my room, but I tell most people try and plug it outside. The reason I have it like just inside the door of my room, which is actually quite a lot for me to get out of bed and go and get it. I have to leap out of bed and like walk. It's just because I live on my own and in case of emergency, you know, because my mom lives alone. And so other than that, I wouldn't and I do realize that that's a problem for me. And like in an ideal where I charge it downstairs, I just wouldn't have it anywhere near me, but I don't have a landline right now. So, you know, that's, those sorts of things. But it's so, you know, using blue light blocking glasses, but you know, the world, it is here to stay. So we also have to be realistic about what we can do. And maybe when I realized last week, or the last 2 weeks, when I was with community all the time through work events and friends and stuff, I barely looked at my phone. My screen time was down massively.
If you could pick one thing for people to do right now, like the easiest, quickest thing, what would you suggest?
What was the outcome of it? To reduce the risk of cancer or other?
No, just like to have a healthier lifestyle, you know, because, you know, generally we're talking about having a healthier lifestyle as well, which contributes to, you know, less disease, really.
I think it's going to be different for everyone. For some people, their diet is really poor, so they need to focus on getting their whole foods in. If you're sedentary, you need to get moving. It doesn't matter how. It doesn't. If you're lonely, then you need to go and find community. But all of these pillars of health, so nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress management. If you're really stressed, then the thing you need to focus on is managing stress. Yoga, breath work, meditation. You know, your social health point, you're lonely, you need to go find community. And then if you're coming into contact with lots of environmental toxins, you need to think about what you do. Like, for example, I sleep with a HEPA filter. You know, I live in a very busy, near a very busy road. I think about the clean product. So do you see me? It's not one answer. But I do think that, you know, if you can make 1 or 2 changes every month, by the end of the year, you'll have changed so many things.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, to be honest. I think what we do is we overwhelm ourselves with so many things. Oh, right, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this. And then you don't achieve anything in the end. So kind of just really focusing on a few things at a time slowly until you kind of got the knack of it, really, and then moving on to the next.
And adding things in rather than subtracting, because our brain psychology prefers to add things in. So rather than saying, oh, I'm not going to eat any cakes, I'm going to say, I'm going to add in 2 portions of vegetable at every meal.
Right.
And that's going to change things. I'm going to make sure I walk for 10 minutes after each meal. I am going to, so you're adding things in. I'm going to make sure I message 1 friend every week, or meet 1 friend every week. Do you see what I mean? So that's the kind of level. And if you think about 1% each day, it adds up. If you suddenly try and change everything, you're never going to manage it.
Yeah. No, that's actually fantastic advice. Toral, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your amazing insights. And of course, you can be found on Instagram. You have a website, and I'll share all the details of you. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you.